You found the rabbi and the pastor. I'm the pastor. My name is Kent Philpott, and this is?
I'm the rabbi, Tsvi Bar David.
All right, and he is in Berkeley, California, and I'm just across the bridge in Marin County. And so here we are, due to the pandemic, we're Zooming and trying to keep up with the schedule we need. Now the subject is going to be called racism. The next program after this, we're going to deal with social justice issues, but this is about racism. I'm going to ask Tsvi, do you think you're racist at all?
I am, and in my case, the struggle is not so much with racism vis-a-vis African Americans, but it's about Palestinians. I really struggle with it.
Okay, I have to say the same thing. I was brought up in a black and white neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, and I was just telling you, Tsvi, we moved to Los Angeles to get away from the Portland rains. My dad was a full brush man, and we came there, and it was 50% Jewish. People didn't know what to do with the name Philpott. I got called Kike and Heb.
Oh.
And so I was on the receiving end. And most of these Jewish people had come from Europe and Western and Eastern Europe during the 40s.
Yes.
And so I experienced it myself. But I have to admit, I have a lot of racism in me. Is that wrong, Tsvi? What do you?
I think it's wrong. I mean, we're basically, we're all God's people. It doesn't matter, race, color, creed, national origin, sexual orientation. We're all God's people. We're the human race. I mean, I really love the rabbinic commentary on the Genesis story, and it really goes right to the point, and it says, don't think that you, Jew or non-Jew, are better than anybody else, Jew or non-Jew, because after all, we're all descended from Adam and Eve. And indeed, the way you say human being in Hebrew is Ben Adam, son of Adam. And our humans is Bnei Adam, the children of Adam, Adam and Eve.
Sure.
It's literally embedded in the Hebrew language that we're all the children of just two parents, Adam and Eve, and really we're all the children of God. And so, so racism is simply not an okay option. Certainly not in Judaism. I mean, there's certainly racist Jews. But it's something we have to struggle against. We have to strive for. That's the standard that the Torah puts. The standard that the rabbis make is clear, and that standard is no racism.
Exactly, I agree, Tsvi. All the way down, we all are human beings.
Right.
In that Genesis, he says he made us nephesh.
Right.
Nephesh, living beings.
Living souls, right.
Living beings, and whatever your skin color or your eye color or etc. are irrelevant issues. And I know that we have that. We have that truth. You have that. Jewish people have that. Christians have that. We know that. But something happened in Genesis. In the early chapters, something happened in Genesis chapter 3 which changed the equation.
How?
The fall. The tempter got to brother and sister Adam and Eve, and things have never been the same. And I think that's one of the things that we have to recognize is that there's a force present in our world and our culture that seeks to kill, maim, destroy. And it's not that we assign everything that's wrong to the devil, that presence in the garden. But once it started, then it's in us. We've got it, and it's a thing that now we have to deal with it. So it's always been present in the world, and it's unpleasant. I will be, just in looking at somebody, if I see somebody coming down the street, Tsvi, and they look sort of like me, I'm not worried about them. But if there's somebody else, if they could look a little scary, they fit a stereotypical kind of an image inside of me. I'm alert. I'm a little bit alert now. It's not a decision that I made, but it's in me. And I don't know what you call that. I don't know if we'd call that racism or not.
You know, that's a hard call. At the same time that I don't want to be a racist, at the same time, I need to be prudent depending on what neighborhood I'm walking through. If I'm walking through, I don't know, a mixed neighborhood like University in San Pablo, I certainly know within myself that there are individuals, yes, some of them Black, some of them homeless, not necessarily Black, and I'm cautious. Now that doesn't mean I do them harm. It means I don't want someone to harm me. And is that based upon racial stereotyping? Likely to some extent. I can tell you this: when I was working inside Vacaville prison, it was a non-issue because I felt, oddly enough, I felt safe. I probably felt safer with the inmates. And you have to know that the people who came to the Jewish chaplaincy at Vacaville State Prison were every possible color and creed.
Yeah.
And it didn't bother me. Everybody was welcome. I felt safe. But out on the street and the outside, you know, it's a different matter. So how do I balance prudence, you know, with acting out on a racist impulse? I certainly don't want to harm anybody else as a result of any racism that I've absorbed or that I have within me.
Yeah. I have similar sensations as you do. Now, as a pastor, I have a congregation, small congregation, Marin County, that I know that there's some people that have some rather sharp racist views that are kind of mixed with political. We have in our little church, we have far right, far left. People don't know my own political positions, except that I just say I'm an independent, registered. My wife and I and my son, actually, we're all independents, and we just keep our political positions to a minimum, and so on. But it's not always possible, and a lot of times right now I'm facing more racist kinds of views than I have in some time.
In your church? Well,
a little bit, just a couple people, but in our culture as a whole, I think it's risen to the top. It usually just lies still without too much commotion, but now it's really becoming direct personal encounters in the culture, and I would imagine it's that way in Berkeley, Tsvi. What's been your experience of that in Berkeley?
I haven't been going physically to a synagogue because synagogues and churches and mosques are the last things to be opened under the loosening of sheltering in place restrictions.
Right.
And I don't even know if any of the synagogues that I normally go to are open yet, even under the new rules put out by the state of California, because the rules of the 6 Bay Area counties are still far more restrictive than the rules of the state of California. So um, I would say that again, historically, for on and off, there's been a pretty good relationship between the Jewish community and the Black community, um, and it may very well have to do with um, our story of being slaves ourselves in Egypt and the liberation from Egypt. And Blacks definitely, for obvious reasons, resonate with that story of slavery and liberation from slavery.
Sure.
So the racism that I've encountered in the Jewish community, whether it be in synagogues or not, are sometimes very negative attitudes towards Arabs, very negative attitudes towards Palestinians in particular. And of course, the irony is that the scientists have done the blood work, and we are them and they are us. In other words, to a very high degree of accuracy, the genetic typing for Sephardic Jews, and for that matter, Ashkenazi Jews like myself and Palestinians, is very, very close.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, in other words, we all come from the same place, not just the Middle East, but Israel, Palestine. So,
Right.
but it's certainly well known that that brothers and sisters and cousins can fight the worst. Brothers, sisters, and cousins can fight the worst. So do you call that racism, or do you call it sibling rivalry?
Yeah.
If from my perspective, it's really more a matter of sibling rivalry than anything else. And so that's really the challenge that I've had to work on. And in a way, I've forced myself to go into situations like the Stanford Middle Eastern Ensemble that I've been a part of for over 5 years, which unfortunately, because of coronavirus, isn't running right now. Performances are just not okay right now because of coronavirus. And, half the group out of 10, 15 people are Jews and Israelis, Jewish Israelis in particular. And the other half are different kinds of Muslims from Turkey and from Iran, from Arab countries, and in particular from Palestine, and to be even more particular, from Gaza.
Oh,
And
okay.
in a way, it's kind of like, okay, how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to behave in a decent and an accepting way? And so I go to, up until the time we had practices, which stopped about 3 months ago when coronavirus really hit in the U.S. I would sit next to Abdullah and I would ask him questions about the Arabic, and he'd answer me. And we both made the effort, and we just talked about the music, talked about the culture, talked about the religion, talked about Islam, and didn't talk about the obvious politics. He's from Gaza, right? We just didn't do that. So I think he and I are still uncomfortable with each other. We work at it, but the discomfort is still there. But interestingly enough, Abdullah regards Ilana, my wife, as his Jewish auntie. If only every Palestinian had a Jewish aunt, and if only every Jewish Israeli, had a Palestinian aunt, I think the Messiah, as in my sense as a Jew, would come.
Now, Tsvi, racism has different colors to it in the sense that it's not just, let's say, racial,
No.
the color of your skin or the culture you came from,
right.
But we will find it. There is religious prejudice.
So we should call it prejudice, right?
Is
right.
just as dangerous.
Yeah,
Marin County is the least Christian county in America.
Marin?
And there are 3 or 4 different kinds than there are Christians. And
Mm.
we experience Christian prejudice against us here,
Mm.
against Christianity,
Mhm.
particularly when the evangelicals are supposed to be for Trump. And so they find out that you're a Christian. Of course, you're voting for Trump, aren't you? And there's a prejudice there
Right.
that exists. I mean, it's
Yeah.
palpable. I encounter it on a regular, ongoing basis. Surprising, and I didn't know what that was for a while. And in more recent times, I realized, oh, that's another face of what we call racism. So,
It's certainly prejudice. I don't want to. I don't want to split words too much. Whether we call it racism or prejudice, but I think there's a broader category of prejudice to prejudge, not on the basis of the human being standing in front of me, but to prejudge them on the basis of some category, like the color of the skin or their religion, if I happen to know it, and so on and so forth. And you're right. It's very, very easy to do. I guess I feel blessed by God that for quite a few years now, I've been doing a lot of interfaith work. On some level, I really started doing that interfaith work almost 20 years ago, when I was doing interfaith chaplaincy training at the Palo Alto VA hospital. The overwhelming bulk of my patients, they were vets, and their family were from either Christians or from a Christian background of one kind or another. Very few were Jews, and it didn't matter because the training was interfaith. And then I followed that up with methadone counseling, which, my clients were every possible color, every possible race, every possible religion. And then from there, as you know, I went into doing both chaplaincy work on and off in Vacaville Prison and a few other prisons, and also a pretty goodly amount of volunteer work at Walden House, at several of their residential recovery facilities from alcohol and drugs. And again, overwhelmingly, the folks I dealt with were not Jewish. Although, yes, there were Jews there. There were. I'm not going to pretend there weren't. There were. But overwhelmingly, the folks I dealt with were from every possible background, religion, and no religion whatsoever. Yeah. So I've been pretty fortunate in that I've had that interfaith, multiracial, experience in lots and lots and lots of environments where I felt safe. It wasn't like I was endangered walking in a bad neighborhood of any kind, right? I felt safe in those environments, and I was able to function and hopefully to be of service. So, the question is, how do I get rid of my own racism? How do I get rid of my own prejudice, to use what I consider to be a broader word that encompasses racism? And how do I help others to get rid of it? And that's a really tough question. I think it has to do with something my sister-in-law practices, which is empathetic listening, compassionate listening.
Okay.
Compassionate listening. It's not about my telling you you're wrong. It's about my simply listening. And it's okay when I listen to politely say, hey, could you simply clarify something that I don't understand? Because again, I'm not going up against you. I'm not judging you. I just want to understand. Help me understand where you're coming from.
Sure.
I suspect that's something you do, Ken.
I like that approach, Tsvi. You said a little while ago about the Jewish people were slaves in Egypt.
Oh, yeah.
The slave motif comes out in the Christian scripture, the Greek Bible. Paul referred to himself as a doulos, that is an owned slave of Jesus Christ. And so, a doulos, not a hired hand, but owned by. And so the doulos, the slave experience, is one that's similar in Christianity. And I was going to mention real quick also, the parable of the Good Samaritan that Jesus told,
Mm-hmm.
very significant. There was a lot of, racial, religious prejudice between the Samaritans and the Jewish people.
Oh yeah, the Jews did not have a whole lot of use for the Samaritans.
Oh,
Even
yeah.
though the Samaritans essentially adopted, the monotheistic Jewish religion. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a rival religion. The Jewish people considered them half-breeds because they were interbred with the Syrians starting in 722 BCE.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jesus tells the story of a Samaritan. It talks about a guy that got beat up, stripped of his clothes, robbed, half dead on the Jericho road, that from Jericho to Jerusalem.
Right.
A priest comes by, walks away. A Levite comes back, walks away. But now comes a Samaritan, takes care of him. And Jesus uses that as an example of who it is that is a neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
And so he uses this most extreme parable, the images, to show that this is how his followers are supposed to be. In other words, he judges both a racial and a religious prejudice in that parable, which is one of my favorites. And I read that when I told you that I was part of the march. I was speaking, and I gave that parable in that little presentation and told that story. And in a minute, I'll tell you I'm going to tell you now how I ended it. I ended it with what's called the Golden Rule. It's found in the Sermon on the Mount, Tsvi. It says,
Yes.
Jesus said, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So my little phrase was, do unto others. And that was the thing that I presented, which helps me. And I'm getting back to what you were saying. How do we then go about dealing with our own personal prejudices and so on?
I think from a theological perspective, in some ways, it's easier for Christians and Muslims because those two religions really start out as universal religions that are not really tied to a particular race. It's true that Muhammad was an Arab. It's true that Jesus was a Jew, but the religions very quickly evolved into the theology. Certainly evolved into these are universal religions for all mankind, which leads to other issues. But I don't want to get there. But the advantage of that is that here you have a religion about a universal God, which is supposed to be universal for all human beings, and it's not tied to a tribe or nationality. The challenge for Judaism theologically was to come to very humanitarian, open positions about other peoples, while still on some level, how can I put it? Judaism is the religion of my tribe, and it happens to be a religion wrapped around the God of the cosmos. All right, that's in essence Jewish theology, Jewish ideology, and at times we've been pretty open about what I call adoption and what you might call conversion, and at times we haven't been for historical reasons. But we've had to, as Jews, we've had to come to the universal from the particular. Because we don't make the claim, we've never made the claim that Judaism as a religion is universal. God is. The God at the center of all three religions, Abrahamic religions, is universal, the one God. But Judaism as such is not understood by the rabbis, not understood by Jews to be the right religion for everybody. And so what I love, and I've quoted this beautiful passage, and you will help me with chapter and verse because I'm lousy with chapter and verse. So it's either Isaiah or maybe it's Joel or Hosea. It's that wonderful vision of one of those prophets, tell me which one, where it said, and then all the nations of the earth will flow up the sides of Mount Zion to the temple courtyard and to hold a parade like the United Nations, and every nation will march in a delegation behind a flag with the name or picture of their God on that flag. And we will walk with a flag that has the words Yud He Vav He on it, namely God's real name, right? Jehovah, Yud He Vav He. And it's this beautiful universal vision, which not only was there in prophetic times, but the rabbis definitely, for all kinds of reasons, some of them were prudential because we lived in other people's empires. The rabbis practiced and wanted all Jews to practice, at a minimum, tolerance of other nations and faiths, at an absolute minimum. Thus, that beautiful story. How can you say that you're better or worse than anybody else? We all have the same parent, Adam and Eve, right? Which is, again, not to say that there aren't Jews with prejudices, that there aren't Jews that are racist. There are. But yes, the theology doesn't support them.
Yes. We're going to have an opportunity in the next program, Tsvi, to talk about social justice.
Good.
And so we'll have a chance to wade into that, what might be a quagmire. I don't know.
I don't think so.
No, okay. Well, we'll try to do that. The passage that you quoted has not come to me. I'm just starting preaching on Isaiah this coming Sunday. We're going to go through the book of Isaiah, about 8 to 10 sermons through Isaiah. And looking forward to it. I've been studying it all week here, but
wonderful.
But anyway, Tsvi, social justice. Everybody watching this has to wait a week, or if you got a YouTube, you just go back to back. But we're going to have to say goodbye. Do you remember what we always said goodbye, Tsvi?
Remind me, and then we'll say it.
May the peace of God be with you. Okay, well, here we go. 1, 2, 3. May the peace of God be with you. All right, so long from the rabbi and the pastor.
Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below. Praise him above, ye